Welcome to the fourth panel of the morning and the last panel before lunch. These set of panels have all dealt with innovation, and what we'd like to address right now is the broad topic of innovation and but specifically about securing America's cyber future, navigating change and creating value in the digital world. So let me just stop and introduce myself. I'm Pat Falcone. I have the privilege of serving as a national commissioner with the council, and I'm also the Deputy Director for Science and Technology at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And so to address these issues about our cyber future, we have an absolutely terrific panel, and I think we exemplify the sets of communities that the council brings together to address these challenging topics. To my immediate left, we have Dr. Darryll Pines, who serves as the president of the great University of Maryland and is an electrical engineer. And I also need to mention that he did work at Lawrence Livermore early in his career.
Aerospace engineer.
Aerospace engineer, sorry.
So I believe in the Sputnik moments.
You lived
1957.
those. Aerospace engineering. I'm sorry I made that mistake. We also have from our industry sector, Mr. Alex Rogers, who is the president of Qualcomm Technology Licensing and Global Affairs, and also a national commissioner, as is Darryll. And representing our very important government sector, we have Ms. Joyce Corell, who is the Senior Technology Advisor to this new office that Congress created around cyber in the government, the Office of the National Cyber Director. And so she addresses issues of technology and ecosystems and is a distinguished and experienced national security professional who has talked frequently about supply chain risk management and these issues. So with this set of great folks, we can contemplate this situation that we find ourselves in. The United States is really becoming a sensorized and digitized nation. And while the world is moving ever more towards a situation of hyperconnectivity, almost everything in our economy and society is being digitized, datafied, and digitally connected. And this is creating a wave of economic opportunities, igniting new cycles of discovery and performance improvement, but also creating significant challenges. And so, when you think about all those effects, this digital revolution has been one of the most disruptive forces of the modern era. And with mega digitization and powerful new digital technologies such as AI, machine learning, are all beginning to scale, are we entering a new era of technology-driven disruption, creative disruption and reorganization of the economy, labor markets, and patterns of society? So we want to talk about what that might look like and what sectors of our innovation ecosystem are likely to face major disruption in the years ahead. And maybe I'll turn first to you, Darryll, where a lot of this stuff is being invented.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having this panel, and thank you for having me on the panel. To my colleagues in higher education, you'll know what I'm about to say because it happened to you. So take yourself back to March of 2020, when most of our campuses do in-person instruction. And all of us, within a matter of 1 week, had to pivot to virtual instruction. Now, I want to tell you that if I was to tell my faculty back in 2018 that they were going to pivot to 100% to virtual instruction, I would have been fired within a few hours of that statement, right? But fortunately, the pandemic actually helped higher education and all education to actually pivot to be able to deliver to our students and our constituents the mission that we have, which is to serve educating them going forward. How did we make this all happen? Is because of this revolution in computing and digitalization. And I was sitting on a panel next to the president of Zoom in late 2020. And it's really interesting because and this was virtual, and I asked him in one of the sidebars, did you anticipate something was gonna happen and you were ready for this? He said, absolutely not, we were just lucky. So they went, he told me in 2018, they were a $30 million market capitalization firm. And today, this is hard to believe, but today they're valued at $20 billion. Isn't that amazing? So that's the rapidness of him being at the right place with the technology at the right time that not only served our needs in higher education, but served needs across industry and government. And so this rapid digitization has allowed us to deliver our product, which is the mission of education. But most importantly, to all my colleagues in the room, and they know where I'm going, it allowed us to reimagine education to learners of all types. And I just want to share one last story while I've got the mic. We were able to partner with our local Prince George's County school system right over here in Maryland. The superintendent called me up and said, we need math instructors. And I said, I can only give you virtual math instructors. I can't give you physical math instructors. And they did help in pre-calculus and calculus. So we ended up delivering in the fall of 2020 through the virtual Zoom modality using our instructors, high school calculus to all students in Prince George's County in high school. That was a pilot. We're now in our third year of doing it. And so the interconnectedness of now higher education with K-12 can happen as a result of digitization. And so I just want to bring that as an example. This has been actually a nice thing that has happened and a collaboration that's going to extend to other courses.
Thanks so much. Alex, you're from one of our leading tech companies, Qualcomm. How in general has this digital transformation affected industries?
Yeah, so before I start on the industry side of things, I just want all the teachers to know that Qualcomm has a few AI tweaks to Teams and Zoom calls that teachers are really going to like. Maybe we'll get to that later. But digital transformation has been happening for a long time, and I want to give two examples, one that is extraordinarily successful and one that is still in the starting gates. And it is an example of public-private partnership and government taking away obstacles and setting up incentives. So the first is something you're all familiar with. In 1983, the Reagan administration allowed commercial access to GPS. In 1997, the FCC said, for mobile devices, we need to have position location. In 2005, the regulation said 95% of US operator coverage has to have E911 50 to 100 meter specific position location throughout their networks. And so an obstacle was removed, access to GPS, and an incentive was put in place, E911 requirements. And then industry reacted with digital transformation. Now, it didn't happen by putting a couple of pieces of Lego blocks together. Qualcomm spent probably billions converging cellular and GPS technologies to create a GPS One platform that allowed position location on mobile. But then you had transformation of industries, and everybody's familiar with it now. You would be wondering what to do next if you didn't have access to this, because you can't find a paper map anywhere, right? And so that's an example of public-private partnership working together. Another example is intelligent transportation systems. Everything that is on a road that has rubber tires and everything that walks on a sidewalk can be intelligently connected through something that we call, in our acronym-based industry, CV2X, cellular vehicle to everything. So cars can communicate with infrastructure, with other cars, with motorcycles, with scooters, with bicycles, with pedestrians. Everything can be networked. You can literally have transportation systems running as a digitally connected network. Think about the efficiencies, the cost savings, the reduction in costs, for example, in insurance, but also think about life saving. Okay, 42,000 deaths in 2019, actually 2019. It peaked, okay? Our highway deaths are going up, believe it or not. This can be eliminated, all but eliminated. But it hasn't happened yet, because so far, public-private partnership is not quite working. The FCC, the spectrum is released, the FCC can make it happen, but they're holding off for different reasons. They have to coordinate with DOT, and then DOC needs to step in, and then it needs to happen not just across the federal level, but as someone in the earlier panelists mentioned, it has to actually be enabled at the state and local levels as well. But once you get that done, and once you create incentives, for example, cars equipped with CV2X will get better insurance ratings. Cars equipped with CVDX will be listed on NCAP, okay, the new car assessment program. Once you get those incentives in place and these barriers removed, you will have a complete transformation of traffic, of transportation. You will have an intelligent transportation system. That is needed to happen because we need to stay competitive. It's actually already happening at scale in China. They actually already have NCAP for 2025 in China. They have NCAP for 2025 in Europe as well. There are programs being rolled out in Europe ahead of the US. So public-private partnership, incentives, obstacles, all these things need to be taken care of, and you'll see more digital transformation. And I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's a tantalizing future that you painted. But we know we're also concerned about vulnerabilities, right? I mean, cybersecurity is a topic related to the digital transformation. It's become a whole of nation challenge, and we really think that we depend on every American at this point to be a digital guardian of sorts. So what are additional measures that we need to take, both technological and human, and reducing barriers, as you've already mentioned, Alex, to protect and defend our critical systems like transportation systems and make this sprawling digital ecosystem more resilient? And maybe, Joyce, you could address that.
So, thanks for having me on this panel. I want to first start, before getting into my remarks, to comment on what Darryll had said, using Zoom as an example that I think is very of the moment. Because once everyone went home and we all had to telework or find a way to go to school remotely, no matter what grade you were in, here was this company that was a fairly new company, and all of a sudden, they benefited from advice from experts from all over the world who were advising them on their shortcomings from a cybersecurity perspective. And the company responded and had plans and engaged very robustly through the blogosphere and with other conversations with government organizations. So that was sort of an example where we were all in the same boat. We all came together. We realized that we needed to be able to have means of communication that were secure, and the scalability of the platform was very appealing to many people, but it wasn't as secure as people needed. So we collectively came together in a very organic way. And so that's just sort of an illustrative example of disruptive change. So when we think about the cyber environment, many times we define it from a very negative perspective, and we think about the threats, and we think about the costs and the consequences of just some type of benign, someone clicks on a link and an entire network goes down, or one password is not designed in a robust way and then is exploited, and we're then faced with consequences of responding and repairing these vulnerabilities, mitigating the vulnerabilities that may, in example of cases like Log4j, using open source software, these vulnerabilities will be with us for quite some time. So from our organization, our perspective as a new organization created out of the work of the Cyber Solarium Commission, from a strategic perspective, we're looking at this differently. Rather than defining it negatively, let's define it from an aspirational perspective. We don't do cyber just because cyber's there. We use these tools, we develop these tools to enable us to achieve our aspirations, no matter who we are, in business, students, or just communicating with our families. So what do we want that digital environment to look like so that we are able to achieve our aspirations? And at the end of the day, I heard a lot of comments from the panelists earlier about sort of this coming together, where the roles were shifting in government and academia, et cetera, multidisciplinary approaches to solving complex scientific challenges. Well, from our perspective, our philosophy is, from a cybersecurity perspective, it is a whole of nation, a whole of society thing, and an activity we do with our international partners, so that our tagline is, to beat one of us, you have to beat all of us. So what is the digital environment that we want to deliver that type of a life for us? We're in the process of producing a national cybersecurity strategy, hope to get it published early next calendar year. And that's when we'll be able to share with folks, what our priorities are in this space. The work that we did developing this strategy with extensive consultation with the private sector, with academia, not just our silo of excellence in the government. But we have some key areas where we're focused on outcomes that I want to touch on because they're relevant to things other people have spoken about. One of those outcomes is improving public-private sector collaboration and partnerships. You mentioned, removing obstacles and providing incentives. One of our approaches in this context will be to pursue regulatory harmonization, looking at different how cyber is rolled into different regulatory regimes. So that we can eliminate some of those challenges. But collaboration from another perspective, when the public sector and the private sector come together, or companies in a joint venture type of fashion, true collaboration happens not when people sit side by side and I say, I'll do my thing and you do your thing, but rather when you come together, and solely by coming together are you able to derive new insights. And that's one of the key, that type of collaboration is key to innovating and changing and getting past that, which I didn't want to hear the valley of death anymore. I think we pursue those types of paths, we'll be able to get there. We're also, I took note of comments that other people made about, the government should, take these actions. So one of our outcomes that we're going to be measured on by Congress is federal coherence. There are many different parts of the U.S. government that have, the federal government and the state and local government that have cyber missions. So providing federal coherence and not requiring people outside of government to have a PhD in government language to know, with whom to engage, to, have a partnership or just a simple dialogue. We will be looking at aligning resources to aspirations. There's already been some conversation earlier today about the major pieces of legislation that were put forward, not just the CHIPS and Science Act, but the bipartisan infrastructure bill, as well as other pieces of legislation with accompanying appropriations. As these monies are available, either in the form of grants or partnerships, we want to ensure that the grant-giving agencies have cybersecurity tools that can be provided, to support this, as well as requirements that when money goes into innovation, that there are cybersecurity requirements so that what comes out of that research has in place the necessary safeguards to protect that innovation as appropriate. So those are sort of the high-level areas that we're focused on, and looking forward to engaging with folks going forward.
Great. Well, we spent some time this morning talking about regional and community-based research. One of the interesting things in this domain is that with hyperconnectivity, the businesses and supply chains and all sorts of things are connected, and the regional nature, the local nature, is not exactly as important because, of course, cyber and the connectivity acts from all sorts of locations to all others. So what are the implications, would you say, of this hyper-connected world for all of these domains, for as well as for geopolitics, as well as for industry and universities and the government and capital flows and our aspirations? Any of you want to comment on that?
Sure. So I think hyperconnectivity for all industries, of course, higher education can be truly transformative, but there could be also unintended consequences that are negative in the supply chain. So I'll give you one example that you all will remember. You might remember in March of 2021 when the Ever Given cargo ship got stuck in the Suez Canal for 6 days, just 6 days. And that caused a disruption in the United States in terms of goods and services for 3 months. 6 days, 3 months, $10 billion. Because that was a transportation node that brought goods and services, one part of the world, to North America. And so that's an example of not having resiliency in our supply chain. So in general, hyperconnectivity is good for data, good for people, good for commerce to flow more freely. but one must be very careful to ensure that safeguards are in place, including transparency of policies, standards, practices, and resiliency to the supply chain. This includes resiliency to supply chains to climate change. And I just want to share one University of Maryland story that's connected to this. So University of Maryland team analyzed temperature and precipitation data of 12,000 US, Chinese, and Taiwanese production sites in supply chains for about 100 manufacturers in the high-tech, auto, and consumer goods industries. They found 49% of the sites in the United States, China, and Taiwan experienced an increase in climate variability. Within these proportions, much higher variability were in firms from China and Taiwan, and therefore, if they were in your supply chain, you would have issues of supplies to your particular manufacturing domain. So again, cyber is important, but climate change is also important in supply chain.
Thanks. Alex?
So Qualcomm, as a semiconductor company, was involved in the supply chain semiconductor shortage issue. About COVID, I don't think we'd quite say the same as Zoom, that we were lucky that there was COVID, but one of the things that came out of COVID was people realized semiconductors were important. And so aside from supply chain disruption, we're in favor of hyperconnectivity. That's what we do. We connect. But there is a new form of hyperconnectivity that is happening. And so when you think about IoT, you shouldn't just think about 14 billion devices connected. It's 14 billion devices, and there will be more and more connected devices that are intelligently connected. They will be computing devices, sensing devices, and they will have on-device AI. This is not a futuristic thing. This is something that we are doing right now. Our fastest growing business is what we call our CSS business, Connected Smart Systems. And so hyperconnectivity involves this transition of being connected to the cloud to actually being connected to the edge of the cloud with devices that have much more autonomy and connectivity, more smarts, more intelligence. And this will create more opportunities, more transformation. All of these things that I talked about, GPS plus communications, cellular V2X, what I'm talking about now in terms of IoT and the intelligent connected edge, all of these things will be platforms for further innovation, for new jobs, new businesses, new use cases, new products that we haven't yet imagined. And it is going to happen, actually, at pace.
Yeah, I'd like to shift a little bit from that example and talk about workforce development. That is having access to the talent pool, as was described earlier, is a key market differentiator from a competition perspective. And the diversity of the people in our country are a strength of our country. But in the cybersecurity field, there's an unbalance in a couple of areas. One is how both government and private sector companies hire people into the cybersecurity field, and another is really getting access to, going back to the sports analogy of only fielding 10%, there's a whole community of people that have been untouched because they aren't in a position to have an easy pathway or an on-ramp, if you think of a highway system, an on-ramp into a cyber field. This is a priority for my director. This is a priority for the White House. In the summer, we hosted a summit and invited a number of people, limited by COVID protocols because it was in person in the White House. But that was our launch platform to lay out sort of a vision to develop a national cyber workforce education and training strategy. More recently, about a month and a half ago, we issued a request for information based on the conversations that we had had, asking, sort of in a public canvassing, what creative things are people, whether they're nonprofits or private sector firms, what is going on in the field of training? What are ways to entice new people to hire and retain talented people? The framing convention that we've used in this particular context to really characterize, how broad our aperture really is on this topic is looking at, in the cybersecurity field, those who would be defined as the few, the many, and the all. The few are those people who really need hardcore cybersecurity skills. You need matriculate from a 4-year school or have an advanced degree. And these are the people that are network operators, they're network defenders, they're capability developers, like at a company like Qualcomm. So, and we have of studies that have examined this, of shortages in the US, over 700,000 vacancies, 700,000 jobs going unfilled in both government and the private sector. And I'm very sure that is a softball number, a low ball number. So we have a lot of work ahead of us to actually get the talent that we need to bring into this new digital environment, or this evolving digital environment. And it's pretty clear, the academic institutions, what kind of education and training people need for those skills. There are a couple of shortages that have been identified in that you don't have to get a computer science degree, you may not actually have to take a class in secure software development. And we realize now that that's kind of an educational deficit. So how do we address that? When we think about the many, these are the many, those are people who would be in what we would call cyber adjacent jobs. And these are people who need to understand the cyber domain to a certain degree. These are your people in HR who have to hire people. These are your attorneys who need to understand, technical issues. These are people who are in an acquisition or procurement field, who are looking to buy things and get a good deal on something, but need to understand what they're looking to purchase and what kind of capability they're bringing on. Then those people need tailored training. And then the last is, when we think about our digital society, these are the all, from cradle to grave, how do we want to educate people and have the people in our country be digitally literate? And that is, across generations. Many people think that young people are characterized as digital natives. They're really not digital natives, they're app natives. And they understand, how to use apps on the handsets to which they are glued, but they don't necessarily understand what underpins that. So these are the three kind of core areas or demographics that we're looking at. And we can share our requests for information and hope that we continue the dialogue with this council, because the talent base is such a key element of competitiveness.
This has been a terrific set of comments. I think to comport with our action imperative, maybe each of you could share quickly a sense of how do we just take some friction out of the things that are happening now, so that we can make our economy, our businesses, our universities, our government keep pace with this change, stay ahead of competition, and leverage all these new technologies quickly. So maybe we got a quick set of actions.
So in the sports analogy, since we've been using them, how about FIFA World Cup? Digitization, interconnectedness, and cybersecurity is like a soccer game. You need goals.
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to switch very quickly from connecting machines to connecting humans. Out of the population of 8 billion on the planet, 3 billion are unconnected. In the US, about 1 out of every 5 households either have no or inadequate internet connectivity. This is not a capability problem, it's a cost problem. And there are ways to reduce costs to make those last mile connections. You don't have to lay fiber everywhere. The technology actually exists to make those last mile connections through wireless communication that delivers high bandwidth broadband. And so that will take some friction out of the system in terms of getting to the people that we need to get to.
Great action.
Yeah, I'll just reemphasize the point that I made previously about regulatory harmonization. As we look at the energy sector, the water and wastewater, water treatment sector, the telecommunications sector, how do we harmonize regulations so that we are able to identify points of friction, and then we can immediately remove them. Many people talk about this as being sort of a once in a generation opportunity for change. So I would echo sort of Erwin's comments earlier that he made, that this really is a pivotal moment, and we need goals.
Thanks so much. Well, please join me in thanking this great set of panelists. Thank you.